Well, hello and a very warm welcome to this webinar on Italy's proposed law on NPL repurchases by borrowers, brought to you by Scope Ratings. My name is Keith Mullin, and it's my pleasure to be your moderator today. Now, since the government's proposal was unveiled, in the wake, let's not forget, of the announcement about the windfall tax on Italian banks, there's been a wave of media and market comment, which speaks to the high level of interest in this topic. Indeed, the number of delegates on today's call is a clear sign that this interest has not diminished. Rather than the delivering a formal presentation today, we're going straight to a Q&A session so we can get into the proposal and its likely consequences. So I have a series of questions to put to the great panel we've lined up for you. So let me introduce them now. From the Scope side, we have Rosella Guidoni and Paolo Lichtenstein from Scope's Structured Finance team, and Alessandro Boratti from Scope's banking team. And I'm delighted to be joined also by our special guest, Gianrico Gianesi, a partner at law firm Chiamenti. So hi panel, great to see you. Before we start, let me just say that we've produced a short written commentary on the NPL proposal, and this will be available for download at the end of today's session. And after that, it'll be available on the Scope Ratings website. And finally, we do want to answer your questions, so please type them as we go along into the questions tab on this platform, and we'll get to them at the end. So that's it from me. Let's get straight to it. Gianrico, welcome. I'd like to start, if I may, with you. Could you outline the proposal and the major considerations as you see them from a legal perspective?
Of course, and thanks a lot, Kate, and the Scope team for this invitation. Thanks for inviting to talk about this very interesting topic, and of course, it's a topic which is raising a lot of discussion in the recent days. So, first of all, as you suggested, let's start from a quick recap on the status of the art. So, in a nutshell, currently we have three law proposals. One is dated June 23 and is from Partito Democratico, and other two are dated December and January 22 and 23 and are from Fratelli d'Italia. The most recent, the one from Partito Democratico, is from an opposition party, minority party, so we won't be taking that into account so far. The other two from Fratelli d'Italia are exactly the same law proposal, one submitted at the Camera and the other submitted at the Senato. Both of the proposals have been assigned to a commission, but only the review of the proposal at the chamber, so the 843 we are talking about, which I remember is exactly the same test as submitted to the Senate, has been started being reviewed by the relevant commission. The law proposal can be summarized as follows. First of all, it applies to receivable classified to NPEs between 2018 and 2021, and which, based on what indicated in the law proposal, are being sold in a certain time window. Currently is applicable, the proposal will be applicable to those sold by December 2022. But of course, since the idea would be to apply the law proposal to sale carried out in a certain short time frame after the entry into force of the law, we would expect eventually such term to be of course updated accordingly. Besides this, the law proposal in a nutshell provides for a right for debtors which receivable have been sold or are going to be sold in a short time frame, to extinguish their obligation by paying the relevant purchase price paid by the relevant purchaser plus 20% lump sum amount. This would apply to receivable where judicial or extrajudicial deed has been notified already to the debtor. Has not been notified, sorry, to the debtor. In case a judicial or extrajudicial deed has been notified to the debtor, the lump sum to be added to the relevant purchase price would be 40% of such purchase price. This right is being granted. So this right to extinguish that obligation is granted upon a notice being served by the creditor to the debtor by 10 days of the relevant sale being implemented. Or in case a sale has been implemented before the entry into force of the law, this notice shall be given by 30 days of the entry into force of the law. And the notice, and this is very important, shall contain the relevant claim purchase price as well as any documentation duly evidencing the truthfulness and completeness of the relevant information. Then the debtor would have 30 days time period to accept, to exercise this redemption option, so to decide whether or not to exercise it, while it would have 90 days more to make the actual payment. In case of exercise the notice, of course, the receivable is extinguished by way of payment of the relevant amount, and the debt would be automatically cancelled from the Bank of Italy Credit Bureau. So, as such, this proposal can be summarized as a sort of optional redemption on the debtor at a pre-agreed capped purchase price, again, which is the purchase price paid by the relevant purchaser plus 20% in certain circumstances or 40% in some other circumstances. This is, Kate, more or less an overview of the status of the current law proposal and of its content. Maybe I can very high level, and before leaving the speech, to scope for a more specific reasoning on the concrete impact of this law proposal on Italian NPL market and relevant transaction. I can just summarize a very high level consideration on this. First of all, and why the market and all the operators are concerned by this law proposal, both on seller side and on buyer side, but also on the recovery side. First of all, the law proposal indicates that it is aimed at boosting credit recovery, while the impression is that it would have the opposite effect by capping the maximum recoverable amount and also giving raise to possible additional opposition by the debtors in respect of this entire procedure. Secondly, the law proposal would apply to sale already implemented and therefore would have a negative retroactive effect on transactions already carried out. But this law proposal would also potentially apply and negatively affect possible future sales, both in terms of pricing and in terms of volume. And this is not only for the provision contained in this proposal that, again, would be applicable to a certain time window to future sale, but also for future expectation in case the proposal is implemented. For example, of course, an investor may think that in case of implementation, it could be subject to a renewal. Last 2 points, and then I leave the speech to the scope friends. The law proposal would certainly create discrimination among different debtors. First of all, between defaulted versus non-defaulted in a certain time window. Then discrimination between defaulted with different vintage, depending on when they become MPs and when the receivable were sold. Then discrimination between secured and unsecured creditors due to the price mechanics set forth by the law provision, but also discrimination between Italian debtor enterprises and European enterprises which would not benefit from this provision. Last but not least, this law proposal, in our view, would, more in general, negatively impact the credibility of the Italian system by carrying out this general waiver of debt through private funds and not through public funds. So, okay, this is in a nutshell, very high-level view on the status and on the main concern, and then I will leave the speech to the other speakers.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Gianrico. Very helpful. So, Rossella, I'm going to move to you. So feel free, incidentally, to comment on what Gianrico has already said. But could I ask you what you think the impact of the proposal might be on outstanding NPL securitisations?
Yeah, thanks, Keith, for the question. So we think that basically the legislative proposal would have only a limited impact on the outstanding NPL securitizations, mainly due, let's say, as I'm going to explain, to some operational complexity factors. So basically, our expectation is that if the legislative proposal would pass, then only a small share of borrowers would technically exercise the option, because it will be very difficult for them to concretely implement it. So I'm saying that because basically, as Gianrico already outlined, the legislative proposal envisages that borrowers will have only 1 month, so 30 days following the notification from the issuer to exercise the option, and then a maximum of 90 days, so let's say 3 months, to pay the, let's say, the purchase price. So ultimately, let's say this means that in only 1 month, borrowers will have to decide on, let's say, several things. So first of all, they will have to, let's say, understand the legal terms of the newly passed law, which might not be necessarily very clear for them, also depending, let's say, on clearly their background. Secondly, and this is really a key point, they would have to decide on whether it is economically worthwhile for them to exercise the option. Because basically the point is that the way in which the purchase price is defined does not necessarily guarantee that it will be, let's say, beneficial for the borrowers to exercise the option, depending on, let's say, which is the current status from services proposals. So this is, let's say, a second important point. And thirdly, clearly borrowers would also have to, let's say, determine how to fund the purchase price, because we should also be reminded that in 1 month, these borrowers that were defaulted some years ago should be, let's say, as prescribed by the law, already determine how to fund the purchase price. And given their defaulting status, clearly this would not be necessarily easy for them. So let's say overall, just to summarize in a nutshell, we believe that, let's say, from an operational perspective, this window, these time periods would be a concrete constraint for borrowers to exercise the option. And that's why we believe that in any case, the impact that we expect on the outstanding NPL securitization will be limited.
Okay, yes, indeed. Thanks for that. But Paola, are there any parallels here with the performing world?
Yes, yes. Actually, to put this into context, in most performing transactions, in case of a service disruption, the backup servicer or the designated third party has usually 30 days to notify debtors to redirect the payments into the issuer's account. The draft letters, which are very standard, are usually ready at closing, and debtors' contact details are readily available. In the case of the notification required by the proposed new law, the process would be much more complicated. First, thousands of borrowers would have to be notified in a short time frame, and in some cases, contact details of the borrowers might not be available. And also, as Gianrico was mentioning, the content of the letter is not standard and would need to be carefully defined to comply with all the requirements.
Interesting. Actually, on that point, Gianrico, do you see litigation risk arising here from this notification process, bearing in mind the borrower's details may not even be available, and so the 30-day, 90-day is, I mean, it's quite rigid.
Yeah, no, thanks, Kate. Frankly, yeah, I do see it for two reasons. First reason is that, of course, a non-payer borrower is, per se, a possible active litigator, even where there is no ground for that, just to delay payment. The second point is that in this respect, the law provisions are not that much clear. They give a time frame that, as Paolo was correctly saying, is quite short. So 30 days for 10 days, sorry, for future sale, and 30 days for any past sale implemented before the entry into force of the relevant law provision. So we would think, first of all, that servicer should be. We think that would be impossible for sure. If anything would be approved, we hope no, but wouldn't be in this text, because it would be impossible for servicer to serve 100,000 notices in 30 days. Secondly, the law provision says currently that no recovery proceeding can be carried out in case the notice doesn't duly indicate contain support for evidencing the truthfulness and completeness of the price information. So this is at the consequence of this provision not being well implemented is the voidness of the recovery procedure. So this would raise big litigation risk against servicers, against creditors, due to the uncertainty of provision to be included in these notice letters, very limited time to deliver these letters, and uncertainty on the consequences of letter being, for example, served with 2 days delay. Would it be just a delay that would avoid recovery for the 2 days more that were necessary for the notification, or would then the recovery process be voided from, of course, from inception? Of course, we would deem the first one, but at the current stage, the law proposal is totally unclear in this respect.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Coming back to you, Paola. So Rossella was saying that she didn't believe that the impact of the proposal on the NPL ABS market would be that significant. What about the NPL market itself?
Well, I would like to highlight that the retroactive nature of the proposal has knock-on effects that may cause significant damage to the underlying NPL market. So we believe that the impact on outstanding securitization may be limited, but we still think that this law would be very negative for the NPL market overall. It has created already uncertainty and concern among market participants and investors. And in principle, the law, if passed, would impact outstanding transactions, given the right to borrowers to exercise repurchase options and impacting services, recovery activity, and their ability to follow their business plan. And also, the appetite for NPL transactions in Italy is likely to decrease as legal uncertainty is priced in. So price that investors will be prepared to bid for notes will fall. And it's important to highlight as well that NPL sales have been a very effective tool in the past for banks to achieve, and presently as well, to achieve risk deleveraging and risk diversification, and to free up reserves to continue lending and supporting the economy. So that is something that it goes beyond the potential impact on current securitization that might be outstanding and that we are quite concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. Alessandro, Paola mentioned that obviously the offloads have been a very effective tool for Italian banks. Could you speak to the consequences, perhaps more broadly, for the Italian banking sector were this proposal to be implemented?
Yeah. Hello, everybody, also from my side. Yeah, I mean, although this law doesn't address directly the banking sector, it has, let's say, unwelcome repercussions also for it, because it, in the future, it would impair, let's say, banks' ability or harm banks' ability to sell NPLs, and this a tool that has been proved very effective in the past for Italian banks to sell NPLs. Although it must be said that in our view, in the short term, the bank's credit profile won't be affected. And the reason for that is, first of all, that banks have greatly deleveraged since 2015 they either through disposals, recoveries, or write-offs, they have deleveraged around almost 300 billion euros in NPLs. And as of today, the gross NPL ratio at the sector level is at 3%. It was 17% in 2015. So this has been a massive improvement. And of course, this reduces the need for Italian banks to sell NPLs, let's say, or the pressure on banks to sell NPLs, at least in the short term. The second observation is that, what we have seen in the past earnings season, in the recent earnings season, is that we don't see yet pressure, let's say, from asset quality. Default rates have remained, at least so far, close to record lows. And banks have been quite optimistic on also for the next quarters on the outlook for asset quality. So this means, in a nutshell, that the pressure on banks to sell NPLs will remain, let's say, subdued, at least for the next quarters. Of course, looking more into the long term, this instead would have negative repercussions, because sooner or later banks will have to, let's say, the pressure will start to mount, and banks will have to again tap the market for NPL sales. And a well-functioning NPL market is very needed for banks to achieve so. So banks have committed to very ambitious NPL targets, and so this is, of course, an unwelcome news for the sector.
Yeah.
Apologies, Kate. I have a couple of very quick questions based on what I heard from Rossella and Alessandro, if I may. Really, 1 second or 10 seconds for each. For Rossella, I appreciate that the debtors will have a very short time frame to decide whether or not to exercise the option. So this would make it more difficult to think to a massive exercise. But don't you think that there may be a not negligible adverse selection effect or negative cherry pick effect, in the sense that all the debtors which are, I would say, in a good standing, in the sense that they have money, they may find money, they may afford to pay more than the purchase price, so the good debtors would exercise the option, and so that would cap the income for the high income, let's call it, share of the portfolio, while all the rest won't exercise the option, and this so would maybe negatively impact in any case the transaction. So this is for Rossella. The one for Alessandro is, understand that the banks have already gone through massive leverage plan, but do you think that this a provision along the line of this one could have also a credit crunch effect more in general on the market, in the sense that the banks would in any case factorize to that the sale of future non-performing receivable would be more difficult, that you will have a bunch of debtors cancelled from the Bank of Italy Credit Bureau, and then you would decrease the amount of money that you put on the market, which in this moment, considering that the rates are very high, is already an issue.
Okay, thanks, Gianrico. Rossella, do you want to have a stab at an answer to the question?
Yeah, sure. So I think that Gianrico actually had a point. This is something that we also discussed a lot internally, and you will see also some comments there in our commentary report. But basically, so I have 2 points here. The first point is that yes, there's this risk that, let's say, what we call the good payers, even though we are always talking about defaulted borrowers, but the good payers might exercise the option if it is economically convenient for them. And let's say from that perspective, we can argue that let's say the borrowers that would remain in the outstanding portfolio would be those that either didn't have the funds or were not able to retrieve them really quickly, but in any case remained there. So in a way, they are, let's say, what we would call not very good quality borrowers. So at the end, let's say this effect might trigger an overall decrease in the lifetime recovery rates of the portfolio. So I'm just translating a little bit what Gianrico called, let's say, risk of adverse selection from our perspective, namely talking, from the rating agency point of view, that we could see, let's say, decrease in the lifetime recovery rates. However, let's say, from our perspective, still holds the operational constraint, and namely that the way in which the text is currently, under discussion, we still deem that it would be, let's say, really difficult for borrowers to exercise the option, because there's, let's say, another second key point. These borrowers were defaulted some years ago, but the portfolios are already serviced because the transactions were already closed in the past. So this means that there's a servicer that is continually, let's say, in touch with the borrower, asking if, for example, the borrower wants to agree on an extrajudicial strategy, etc. So let's say the point is that as long as there's a servicer that is regularly in touch with the borrower, it means that in theory the servicer already tried on a best effort basis to conclude on something with the borrower. We're not talking here about, let's say, borrowers that never got in touch with the servicer. So let's say the good, let's say, as an example, the good payers were already detected as so by the servicers. At least this is what I would expect, because it's their job. So then the only reason why a good payer would conclude and exercise the option would be if the cost of the option is materially lower versus what the servicer is trying, to get from the borrower. But this, let's say, furtherly limits from our perspective, the range of the activity and of the interest for the borrower. Then there's also another point that potentially some borrowers might also ask for refinancing from, let's say, some specialized market operators. So these also potentially could happen. But if you think about, let's say, all the constraints that are there, operational constraint, profitability in a way, and if we rely that the servicer really did their job, then let's say from our perspective, the universe might be limited.
Thank you. Alessandro, before we come to your question that Gianrico posed, there is a question which I could interject now, a question from our viewers, which is, what about the consequences for debt collectors and servicers? I mean, I just throw it out there. Do we have any sense about the consequences to these guys who are kind of in the front line? Anyone?
Maybe I can take it. So I suppose that the question is more, let's say, addressed to the servicer job in a way, right? Because we are talking about collectors and servicers. Partially, I think that I already mentioned this, and probably also Paola before. So and also Gianrico, because actually 3 points I think we have highlighted so far. The first point that was highlighted by Gianrico, the risk of litigation. So this would, let's say, make servicers' job more difficult, because they would face, complications that were unexpected at the time where they crafted the business plan. And clearly, let's say, whatever we call unexpected or legal uncertainty is something that the servicer was not aware at the time in which he was crafting the business plan. So ultimately, the fact would be that for the servicers to meet and keep with the business plan expectations might be, let's say, more difficult. Because borrowers might, just, for example, adopt a wait and see approach, and then say, look, I want to see what will happen with this law, or look, other borrowers had this option, I don't have it, why, I still want to negotiate. So not only, let's say, how can I say, litigation risk that is more, let's say, from a legal perspective, but also from, let's say, a behavioral perspective, if you wish, the risk that borrowers will be less cooperative and more willing to, let's say, rely on their negotiation power in a way. But still, and then I'm concluding, overall, let's say, since, as I mentioned at the beginning, our view is that we're talking about, let's say, limited number of borrowers that will exercise the option. We don't expect that basically this option would trigger, the technical events associated with the transactions, like what we call the subordination events or the underperformance events, basically. So decrease the collections in theory should not trigger those kind of events that would ultimately defer part of the fees that the servicer get for doing their job.
Maybe just one additional 2 points to add to this. The first one is something that we had already mentioned, is the operational burden of this notification in a rush that would be requested by law. This would be very challenging for services. And I think that another important point is that going forward as well, when services draft business plans, then legal uncertainty means that they will not know if, like, the change in the terms of and condition of that in which they can operate would let's say would be triggered. So that is something also that will harm the overall NPL market. I think that this is something that we really want to highlight, that retroactive nature of the law. It's adding a lot of uncertainty and negative effects to the market.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So, Alessandro, sorry for keeping you waiting there.
No problem.
You remember what the question is? No, go on.
Yeah.
Would you like to respond to Enrico's question?
Yeah, actually, Enrico is on point with his observation. I believe that this could have indeed some second round effects on lending, and could cut out the risked segments from, let's say, from lending. Now, I'm not sure. I mean, it's too early days to say to talk about credit crunch, and for banks credit, let's say, this is something that might be relevant more in let's say, in a distant future. So I would be, let's say, more. I would be less concerned about that for the time being, at least from a credit perspective, of course.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Look, we got quite a few questions that are coming from the audience. So before I carry on with my questions, I wanted to perhaps clear out some of the viewer questions. So let me go to those now. And perhaps Gianrico, perhaps there's one for you. It's a question about asking for clarity. And it says, will it be applicable also retroactively for sales happened already a while ago, or only for new sales, i.e. new transactions or replenishment?
Yeah, no, the current law proposal expressly states that it is applicable both to sales already carried out and to sales to be carried out in a certain time frame after the entry into force of the law. So the answer is yes, it should be. It should be. Of course, this is what we don't want, and we are trying to make more persuasion, but it should be applicable also to sales already carried out, provided that the receivables have been classified as NPs between 2018 and 2021.
Okay, and Rossella, and perhaps Paolo as well, this question says, do you think that the draft law could have a much stronger negative impact in case of individual debtors, i.e. on consumer unsecured NPLs? Any thoughts?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Do you think that the draft law could have a much stronger negative impact in case of individual debtors, i.e. on consumer unsecured NPLs?
Paula, this is probably linked to the formula for the calculation of the purchase price, maybe.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Okay, so basically, like on the let's say that the the price formula is based currently on the average portfolio price, which means that it's not based on the individual purchase price of the particular loan, but on the portfolio in which the loan it belongs. And then on that, this percentage is applied to the gross book value, so to the outstanding debt, and then 20% or the 40% premium is added. So that creates, let's say, if you want, like a difference to which are the loans that will be, or which are the borrowers that would be advantaged and which are the borrowers which will not. Clearly, unsecured borrowers or small borrowers might be less favored to this, whereas borrowers with a high collateral that let's say would have their price that is in a way lower than what they would have to pay in a normal legal proceeding or under out-of-court agreement. And this is more also linked to the point that Rosella was making, that in any case, let's say those with very good collateral or borrowers that were already, say, able to pay an out-of-court agreement would have been expected to recover, let's say, certain amounts, whereas the small ones would not. So we believe that, like, this price say determination is a bit distortive of how the recoveries or the opportunity to borrowers to clear their debts.
Yeah. Okay, there's another question.
Maybe, sorry, Keith, just a quick example, but just to clarify furtherly this point. And then actually in the commentary, we also put there some very high level figures. So I think that very simple number, what Paola was saying is that let's take, for example, an unsecured borrower. If the servicer, let's say, expected in its business plan to recover, let's say, between 5 and 15%, let's say, of the borrower GBV, gross book value, then based on the price formula, if the borrower was sold, within a mixed portfolio, so a portfolio made of both unsecured and unsecured borrowers, let's say that the price was between, let's say, 30 and 50%, then the borrower would have to pay that average price, so let's say 40% plus premium, so plus the 20 or the 40% based on whether or not it was already in a judicial proceeding. So clearly the ending figure would be something, let's say, above the 40 plus area that would not be economically convenient to exercise versus, let's say, whatever was the target price of the servicer, but that was still expecting a recovery rate between 10 and 15. So the overall, clearly this could vary on a very specific loan by loan basis. So as we know, some unsecured borrowers might have been priced much higher than the figures that I mentioned, but that we already know. And that's also why the servicers apply a statistical approach when they evaluate and forecast the expected recoveries. But I think that overall, that's a little bit the idea that is triggered by this, let's say, average portfolio price formula.
Yeah. Okay, well, so can I stay with you? There's a question which it kind of is in the same area. You may have answered most of it, but I'll read the question, and it's this. Don't you think most debtors will fall under the 40% premium and hence not be affordable for distressed borrowers at such strict deadlines?
Well, it depends. Maybe I can take that one. Actually, it depends on the seniority of the transaction in that case. Like if the servicer have already started legal proceedings or out-of-court settlements on all the portfolio or not. Basically, for the most seasoned transactions, clearly we would expect that this is the case. But still, this in a way, the way that the price is determined based on the portfolio average price means that still with a plus 40%, to be honest, we haven't had made like specific figures. So this like the impact study should follow. But still, there could be cases that might still be convenient for borrowers based on the average price, and clearly it depends also on the composition of the portfolio. If you have a portfolio with a very a high percentage of unsecured loans, and then a smaller one of secured loans, then clearly the secured borrowers will be benefiting from this average price, and yet maybe the plus 40% would still be convenient compared to liquidation of the asset or an out of court that might have been proposed by the servicer. With all the constraints, and clearly we have not looked into detail on each particular transaction yet.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a couple of questions, Genrico, I'd perhaps like to put to you. One of which I'll read the question, and I'll leave it to you to comment on the use of language here. Has the Bank of Italy approved this highly dubious and possibly counterproductive proposed law? And then the second one, perhaps you can move on to, and what's the process for the proposed law to be passed, and how likely do you think it is to be converted into law?
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks, Kate. Answer to the first question is no. So the Bank of Italy is still evaluating the proposal, and I cannot speak for them, but I think that they would raise most of the doubts we are raising now in terms of impact on banks, impact on future lending, impact on the request from the ECB on the leveraging from banks, impact on the market, on a lot of regime, including on the servicing, new servicing regulation, which is aiming at creating one sole market for NPs in Europe, while in Italy we are deviating from the standards of that market. So I would expect the financial authorities to have a number of concern to be raised on this when submitted to them. And so I go to the second point. Now we have just some law proposal. The time to approval for law proposal is very long in Italy, and the path is very steep and very difficult, because the law proposal should go to commission, be commented, then go to one wing, so to the one chamber, then be approved, then pass to the other one, being approved without any amendment, or going back to the first for new approval. So it is a very, very long one, and my impression, law proposal doesn't have a long way, in the sense that it is very difficult and very remote that a law proposal is approved in that respect. So the key point here is what is the government doing? So are we moving from a law proposal, so a parliament act, to a decree proposal, so a government act that would be a much easier, shorter process, or not? In the last days, there's also been an article on the Corriere della Sera on Sunday from Minister Urso. It really seems that the government is starting understanding, also due to some pressure from the finance community, that they are hitting a 300 billion market, a market which is key in terms of volume, in terms of development of Italy, in terms of credibility, in terms of reputation, and also financial impact, because let's remember that Anco, which is a public owned company, has been purchasing billions of receivables in the last 3, 4, 5 years. So that would be a huge impact on the public finances. So the impression is that the government was willing to move to a government act to speed up the process in order not to be stuck in the law approval process that would be probably going nowhere. But in the last days, there have been like a U-turn, or they started changing their mind, appreciating that this is so complex, so crucial and important sector that nothing, it would not be wise to approve anything without having heard, consulted, and somehow agreed on a package with all the relevant parties. So my impression is that either we will have a government decree in the next 2 months, or probably nothing would happen.
Right. Okay. All right. So I'm going to carry on with we're getting so many questions here, so I'm going to carry on for the benefit of our viewers here. There's a question here which is asking you to kind of like pinpoint the impact, and I don't know if this is possible, but it's what proportion of the market could this potentially affect? Can you give an estimated range in percentage terms by value? Sounds like a potentially tough question, but anyone willing to put a pin in the map?
But do you think is the question simply asking how many receivables become NPE between 2018 and 2021? That is the potentially amount of receivable affected, or is going back to what Rossella was doing? How many debtors do you expect to exercise the redemption option? Probably the first one.
Well, the first one, I think, yes.
I don't have this data, frankly.
No, I think we may have to circle back to our questioner. So we will come back to you on this one. There's another question which we kind of covered to a point, but it comes back to this litigation risk point. What representations does a servicer need to make to the debtor, and what litigation risk and operational costs does that entail?
Yeah. Very generally, the law proposal is like, for articles, 2 or 3 lines each, so it's not very detailed. The current wording just says that the servicer shall serve the notice indicating the price and containing all necessary information to give evidence of the truthfulness and completeness of what indicated in the notice. So basically on the price. So in theory, you shall simply give evidence, of the signed transfer agreement and indicating the portfolio purchase price. In theory, in practice, of course, you can expect that should this provision be implemented, many debtors may try to argue and to simply oppose to delay the payment process that they didn't receive sufficiently grounded evidence because, for example, the agreement was not notarized, just an excerpt was shown, only the publication in the official gazette was included, which is not necessarily an evidence. So, there should be made some reasoning on how to meet this requirement if kept, but in any case, it probably would give rise to some opposition or attempt of opposition by the debtors. That's for sure.
Okay, there's a very open question here, which is: has anyone on the panel looked at the impact from rates, i.e., an amount borrowed at 0% base rate to be refinanced at a 3 to 5% rate? I think we touched on this earlier about refinancing and perhaps seeking refinancing from specialist market operators, but this is a general point. Is this coming onto your radar screens at this point? Anyone? Rossella?
I don't know if this refers to potentially what we were mentioning, that borrowers may want to refinance themselves to exercise this option. If so, let's say this goes back to the previous comment. To be honest, what we think is that these borrowers have defaulted in the past, probably as stated in the question, with a starting point at a very low interest rate. And then now they would be refinancing themselves at a much higher interest rate, probably much higher than 3 or 5%, if we think about specialized operators. Yeah. So in that sense, probably we would be shifting credit risk from the investor's balance sheet, the balance sheet of the specialized lenders, and ultimately not curing the borrower's status. That is failing on the ultimate goal of curing their default status if they are then unable to repay their refinancing loan. So if they, in the first loan, they couldn't repay, then probably even if they refinance themselves, unless their situation have changed dramatically, they will not be able to repay the second loan either. Yeah. In that sense, like this would not be solving the issue, and borrowers will not be able to clean themselves from the credit bureaus.
Yeah. Indeed. Here's another one. Let me just throw it out there. Do you expect a negative impact on loan performance, where performing borrowers might opt to stop paying loan installments, and due to ECB calendar provisioning rules, banks will be under pressure to sell loans at a discount, and the borrower could repay below par with the move to stop servicing its debt? So, yeah, do you expect a negative impact on loan performance, I guess?
Well, again, I mean, this is a bit speculation in a way, in the sense that this would not be allowed by the proposed law. So maybe the expectation of the borrower by stop paying if they are performing. Let's divide on like if we are talking about performing borrowers, then I think this is very unlikely, because in principle that the law is not applying to them, and so they would have to default and then expect that a new law, an extension of the law, would favor them to then like waive the amounts that they had borrowed. So I think it's a bit say unlikely, if you want. If we are talking about the borrowers within the portfolios that have been securitized or sold and that they are being serviced, then we do believe that there might be delays on maybe out of court agreements or negotiation with the servicers, because these borrowers may like adopt a wait and see behavior to say, okay, let's see if this is better for me. Maybe if the law is not applicable to them yet, maybe it's extended, or let's see how the market moves and if I can get a better deal, even if it's not applying to me. So probably, yes, there will be. But on performing borrowers, probably like this would be more difficult. And yet, I think that in any case, most performing borrowers don't want to default, unless we are talking about a small portion that is very speculative. Generally, borrowers tend to willingly repay and do not get into like a very cumbersome legal proceeding or recovery activity on them, which is not pleasant at all.
Yeah, indeed. Now, if the law is passed, Gianrico, could it be overruled or struck down by the ECJ? Potentially.
I don't think so. I think that, of course, ECJ could negatively comment on the law, and I would say that as happened, for example, on the law on banks' extra profits, this will lead the Ministry of Finance maybe to intervene in case. Again, if we are talking about law, of course, the process is totally different. But if we are talking about the government decree, the Ministry of Finance may intervene upon comments from financial authorities, and try to tweak the provision to make it maybe less punitive. But I don't think there may be a direct intervention from authorities on the Italian law provision.
Right. Okay. Thanks. Now, would a borrower that's already settled or paid an out-of-court settlement with the servicer have the chance to challenge the payment made in excess of the amount set by the law, where it's become law?
I would say that where a borrower has fully repaid, so has already settled and paid, then the law provision as currently drafted would not apply. The question mark is what happens to repayments plan entered into and agreed between a debtor and the relevant servicer. Possibly the debtor then, as Paula was arguing, would stop paying at least while understanding what's happening, and of course to the extent that the repayment plan was for an amount higher than the purchase price plus 40%, because no doubt that in case of repayment plan we are talking about a loan where extrajudicial activity was already carried out, so would fall within the 40% plus lump sum to be paid, and as such, depending on this calculation, the debtor may try stop paying.
Okay.
Maybe, sorry, just a quick comment on this. There's also probably another point, namely that when we are talking about payment plans, let's say the legislative proposal in any case oblige the borrowers to pay in 3 months, right? So depending, let's say, on the length of the payment plan that was agreed with the servicer, this might not be necessarily convenient for the borrower to. Yeah. And this is also linked, let's say, to the NPV consideration. So also that probably plays a role.
Absolutely.
Is the average price, what metric is the average price based on? GBV or CREV?
On the average price is based on let's say it's a ratio between the price that was paid for the portfolio divided by the GBV.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'm just going to run through. Still got a couple more from my own list, but I think for now we've exhausted. Hold on a second. Sorry, forgive me for 1 second. Well, the question, yeah, okay. So it says in the case of small ticket consumer unsecured, individual borrowers may have a pension or salary, and could more use the option offered by the law. That's kind of, I'm not sure if it's an observation or a question, but
yeah, provided that, as Rossella was saying, then if they opt to early redeem by paying the cap price, they have 90 days to pay in full the due amount. So, of course, it depends on the entity of the pension or anything else they can get.
Yeah, but also there's the point that probably also the servicer itself, unless it didn't have, let's say, the proper infrastructure, did already try to leverage, on the enforcement of 1/5 of the pension or of the job salary, etc., because that's in any case a servicer strategy. Then we know that, let's say, not all servicers are really equipped to do that. But in any case, is not something, let's say, really new. So probably I would expect that if a servicer realized that a DPO or a simple payment plan was not feasible, maybe could try, especially if the position is material, to enforce the salary or the pension. And plus, as Gianrico said, the 3 months window in any case means that the pension should be pretty high, unless the loan was sold with a very cheap price, but with the average price formula of the portfolio, then this probably is not likely to happen, because the price would be high and the pension low, so the 1/5 of it probably would not be enough.
Rossella, I would expect that one individual then can source the payment of the debt through 3 months pension, would pay that irrespective of the law proposal or not.
Probably, yeah, it would be one of the best payers in the portfolio. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got no more viewer questions. I guess the questions I had have kind of already been answered. The ones I had left have already been answered through the viewer Q&A. And so we have hit our 1 hour, as if by magic. So I think unless there are some really super urgent questions, perhaps we can circle back to you one-on-one. But before everyone goes, the written summary of the commentary that we've produced is actually downloadable. So if you go to your screens and at the bottom of the screen, click on apps and then click on handouts, you hopefully will see a PDF. Yes, it's there. And you click on the download button and you can read at your leisure. So while you do that, I wanted to thank all of our speakers, Rosella, Alessandro, Paola, and Generica, so much for a fabulous presentation. Thanks to all our viewers for the great questions. And thanks to staying till the bitter end as well. I know an hour on a webinar can seem like a long time, but this one went very, very quickly. And so if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to get in touch with any of us on the call today. And we'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. So given that this is a proposal, and as we heard, it's not going to be decided tomorrow, we will continue watching very carefully and closely all of the iterations and the developments and the market and media comment. And as appropriate, we may come back. I suspect actually we will come back once we know the answer, depending on what the answer is, for another session. So that's it from us. Thank you again for watching. Thanks to our panelists, and it's goodbye from us.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Many thanks. Bye.
Thank you.